The road to hell is often paved with good intentions, so I figured instead of looking at one of my successful projects today, let's take a look at one of my failures. Welcome to What Could Go Wrong, Episode 1. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. Looking back at the history of my channel, I think one of the reasons that I've been successful is the experimental nature of it. Not every project ends in success, and I've had a fair amount of failures along the way. However, not all of those failures have made it to film. For every video about knockoff Chinese motherboards, refurbished servers, or gaming on NVIDIA Tesla GPUs, there's a legit pile of crap in the background that you guys never got to see. So today I figured I would blow the dust off one of these projects, show you what my original plan was, and then go over why it didn't work. Starting with the P106-90 NVIDIA Mining GPU. And actually, I have two of these. This is the NVIDIA P106-90 Mining GPU, this particular one manufactured by Zotac, and its origins are pretty easy to spot. This is nothing more than the exact same PCB as the GTX 1060 3GB from Zotac, just with the video outputs removed and different firmware flashed onto the board. Well, let me roll that back a second. This does share the exact same PCB and GP106 NVIDIA GPU core as the GTX 1060. However, this one is significantly cut down to 768 CUDA cores from the 1152 of the GTX 1060 3GB or the 1280 of the GTX 1060 6GB. In reality, this is actually a lot closer in performance to a GTX 1050 Ti or a GTX 1050 3GB, even though it does have a GP106 on board. But, that being said, I should still expect some decent performance out of this, if we can get it running, that is. On the upside, I did only spend about $40 a piece on these GPUs back when mining was dead about 18 months ago. Remember those glory days? The reason I originally bought these GPUs was not for gaming, it was actually to see if they would work as a very inexpensive NVENC card for my Plex server. You see, getting NVENC cards is kind of an expensive ordeal, especially if you have a lot of 4K streams that you want to transcode. And Pascal-based GPUs do that very well and very efficiently. Later on, I settled on picking up a Quadro P400 for just over $100, and that card has been doing a fantastic job in my Plex server ever since. Because these don't actually have NVENC on them, even though they are a GP106 die. Out of all the NVIDIA graphics cards in the Pascal series, the only one that does not have NVENC is the GT 1030. So any GTX level, Quadro, or Tesla card should be able to have NVENC decoding ability, except for NVIDIA's mining cards. Now on this channel, I've gotten mad at Apple a couple of times for their arbitrary hardware lockouts or software limitations to make you buy a more expensive model. But in this case, I'm actually kind of confused because you can get cheaper NVIDIA cards that will do NVENC decoding. So why was the decision made to lock out NVENC on the firmware level from these cards when the GTX 1050 exists? And that is, of course, to mention the fact that NVIDIA arbitrarily locks down NVENC functionality on GeForce graphics cards, limiting them to either 2 or 4 concurrent streams, even though the hardware can easily handle 10, 15, 20 on some higher-end GPUs. But let's stay on point here. So, was I successful in enabling NVENC on the P106-90? No, that's why we're talking about it. For this particular graphics card, I actually went as far as crowdsourcing a firmware for the GTX 1060 3GB that Zotac sells at retail. And I tried to flash this card with an engineer copy of NVFlash. Don't ask me how I got it because I'm not going to tell you. But even that was unable to flash this card over and enable NVENC. With that failure, I threw the graphics cards onto the shelf and chalked it up to an $80 business expense that I would never need to look at again. However, with the success of my cloud gaming server and unlocking NVIDIA vGPU on consumer cards, I figured I would give these one last look. So I loaded them up into my cloud gaming server and tried to enable NVENC by spoofing a PCI ID into a virtual machine. Did that work? No. That's why we're talking about it. Callback humor. Underrated. So, with even my most basic plans to use this card and save it from e-waste well and truly thwarted, is there anything that I can use it for? Well, since it was in my cloud gaming server, I figured I would fire it up with a vGPU and see if I could play some games. Did it work? No. That's why we're talking about it. You see, number one, this card has a very odd memory configuration with only 3 gigabytes, which means splitting it is pretty much impossible because you can't have two 2 gigabyte configurations, and 3 1 gigabyte configurations would mean there's not nearly enough power to go around. Luckily for the Pascal series of cards, there is a 3 gigabyte configuration that you can use, essentially giving all of the power from this card to a virtual GPU instance, and that's how I have this one set up. Downside number 2, this card only has 768 CUDA cores, which means it's essentially a GTX 1050 3GB card. And I guess I did review that card on the channel, so I will link it right up here if you want to take a look at NVIDIA's bastard child. But all that's to say, that's not nearly enough power for modern AAA gaming at 1080p high settings. I fired up GTA 5, but this card struggled to maintain even 40 frames per second most of the time, with drops down into the high teens and low 20s. So not exactly a great experience. But believe it or not, that's not even the worst part. Remember, the whole point of me buying these graphics cards was to try to get NVENC working. But not having NVENC makes for a pretty terrible streaming experience, because everything that I'm playing from the cloud gaming server has to be streamed. And the best way to encode that is with NVENC. So, not only was my game limited to about 35 FPS on average, with drops down into the teens, I also had to stare at this compressed JPEG-y mess of a game stream with 35% of my CPU being lost to overhead. Not exactly the best gaming experience in the world. And before 200 of you flood my DMs and Twitter mentions, I do know that Linus Tech Tips was able to get pretty much this exact same card running on a local machine using an integrated GPU. And that is totally a method you could use, although he had a 6 gigabyte variant which does have the full 1280 CUDA cores. This is almost half of that power. In the end, was this $80 well spent on GPUs? While I did learn a lot, I'm still going to say no, which is why we're talking about them. However, not all is lost here. You see, while I only paid about $40 each for these, they're currently trending on eBay for about $250 each, which means I can sell them for about 6 times what I paid for them. You win some, you lose some. That's going to do it for me in this video, unless one of you within the next couple of days manages to contact me with the secret sauce needed to unlock NVENC on these cards, but at the same time, that $250 asking price on eBay definitely has my ear. If you liked this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, there's a couple ways to do that. Head on over to craftcomputing.store and pick yourself up a pint glass, or head on over to my Patreon. Link is down in the video description. As a bonus, you'll get exclusive access to my Discord server, where you can chat with myself as well as the other hosts from Talking Heads. Thank you all so much for watching this one, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Today's beer is from Ghostfish Brewing up in Seattle, Washington, and it is a gluten-free double IPA. Speaking of what could go wrong, this is their Peak Buster. This beer is beyond big. We piled a mountain of Summit Azaka, Centennial, and Eureka hops on a heavy foundation of malted rice, millet, and buckwheat. With a surprising stone-dry finish and over-the-top hop flavors of passion fruit, mango, and pine, this giant is a force to be reckoned with. 95 IBUs. Now, I've had a number of different gluten-free beers over the years. IPAs are always a tricky one. IPAs and German styles in particular. I've had some pretty decent stouts, some porters. The Hefts, it's really difficult to get that malt profile right for obvious reasons, because oftentimes malt is not gluten-free. Not only that, but getting IPAs right is especially difficult. So, Peak Buster IPA, here we go. Yeah. Ooh. Hold on. That is very, very good up front and through 90% of the profile. There's this little twinge of something on the back. I'm not sure if I like it or not. Passion fruit, mango, and pine. I'm getting the pine. I guess I'm getting the passion fruit. The mango, not so much. I'm getting citrus, but it's a much softer citrus. It's not a heavily acidic citrus. That's just pretty solid. Ooh, there's that turn again. How do I describe that? I think I finally have this beer figured out. It starts off with a very Northwest IPA hop profile. It is not necessarily super citrusy, but it's a little bit more on the juicy, sweet side of things. You've got the passion fruit in there. There's a little bit of that gin, pine, juniper kind of taste, kind of floating on top. But it's not necessarily this, lemony, orangey bomb. It's juicy, but without that normal citrusy tang to it. Now, the body on this is absolutely perfect, and it's one of the things that leads me to say I would never have guessed this to be a gluten-free IPA. Gluten-free beers often end up much, much thinner than their standard counterparts because you're replacing a lot of the heavier grains, your wheat, barley, rye, etc., with things like rice, millet, and buckwheat, which is what's in here. So the fact that they nailed the actual texture and feel of this beer speaks volumes. That said, I did mention this beer has, on occasion, this little bit of a weird turn well after the flavor is gone. So there's this aftertaste that just kind of lingers, and it's sour and bitter and not overly pleasant. And I really haven't nailed what's causing that yet. But I will say it's also not decreasing my enjoyment of this beer. For an 8% IPA, it's certainly one that I would have again. And again, for a gluten-free beer, that's saying something.